Hello, I'm Donald Leggatt from London South East, and I'm joined today by Hayden Locke, CEO of AIM-listed potash mine developer Emmerson, who are, as you know, developing a potash mine in northern Morocco. Welcome, Hayden.
Thanks, Donald.
How are things with you?
Yeah, pretty well. Strange times, but everything seems to be functioning on the lockdown version of life, so can't complain.
You seem to be talking to us from your front room. Is that fair?
Exactly. I've been locked down for 5 weeks now, so.
And you said you're avoiding your 3 young children.
That's right. My 3 sub-5-year-olds are roaming somewhere around the house, and I've locked myself in a darkened room.
So best of luck with that. Today we're here to talk about your announcement this morning about mine design access and costings. Interesting RNS. I wonder if you could actually just summarize the main points of that announcement for us.
It's a very interesting announcement for us because it really, as we said in the scoping study, the mine access, i.e. how do we get from the surface down to the mining horizon, is one of the biggest capital items typically for potash projects globally. It can run into the many hundreds of millions of dollars, and in case of Canadian potash mines, over $1 billion on that capital item alone. So the fact that we've got a number that's $34 million, including a contingency, is a huge reduction in capital costs against virtually all of the global potash peers. That's a really important point for us. We're saving nearly $1 billion on that capital item alone. I think the other important thing about the announcement was the number coming in at $34 million in a feasibility study is actually a slight reduction from our scoping study number, which is pretty rare. Mostly it's one-way traffic from scoping study to feasibility study. As you get more detail, more engineering available, you tend to see the costs creep up. So we're very happy that the costs have remained slightly down, very, very slightly below the number that we had in the scoping study.
So this removes a major barrier to entry. What are the other advantages of it being such a low-cost project?
Yeah, you're right. The biggest barrier to entry for potash projects globally is capital cost of production. And typically the largest proportion of that barrier to entry is in the form of the access to mineralization. So it does remove a huge barrier to entry for us. It has numerous knock-on impacts for the project. We can do a much smaller project to start with because our capital intensity is reduced. There's a lower execution risk just because of the scale of the project. We potentially have less sales and marketing risk. It's much more easy to finance because the capital cost is so much lower that we have to amortize. So there's just an array of benefits from having much lower capital cost that really make this project an absolute standout.
So mine access and costings, as I understand it, that's the fourth of your major deliverables. And what else is to come? Can we simply expect the feasibility study to be coming down the track as per before, or should we expect delays? Put it in context for us.
So at this stage, we don't expect any delays from our originally guided timeline of delivering the feasibility study in the first half of 2020. So anytime between now and the end of June. We were pretty significantly ahead of schedule prior to the coronavirus outbreak and all of the knock-on impacts that had. It has had some impact on our ability to work, but nothing so meaningful that we're going to miss our timelines, we think. So we're still carrying on. We're pushing ahead. Obviously, there are some challenges.
It's made life harder, but not impossible.
Exactly. It's made life a little bit more challenging, but what we've found is now that we're all experienced with the lockdown and working from home, things are starting to move quite smoothly now.
We're all getting used to working on Zoom.
Exactly. So we're looking forward to delivering that, and we're hopeful that will confirm what said in the scoping study, that this is an absolutely outstanding potash project, world-class in virtually all of its attributes, and among the lowest capital cost projects in the market.
What I'm really interested to read is that you're using a slightly different mine location. What were the reasons for that? What's the thinking behind that?
Well, as part of the feasibility study, we did a detailed trade-off analysis and a trade-off study of not just the mine location, but multiple variables relating to the project and how they're all interlinked. Because as you can imagine, you change one variable in the project and it can potentially have knock-on impacts for multiple other areas of the project.
Sure, some things are better, some things are worse.
Exactly. So this trade-off study that we did with our consultants was very detailed. and it was both qualitative and quantitative in terms of its analysis. And basically, as a result of that,
what are the two main benefits and made you change your site location?
So significantly shorter decline, significantly smaller surface lithology, which reduces the cost and the risk of the box cut, and much closer to the local infrastructure. So those three benefits were enough to put the decline where we've currently put it. Just a better plant site location.
And you own the site, do you?
We don't own the site at this point in time, but we will eventually acquire that small block of land from the local landholders who we are already in contact with.
And you don't see that as a problem?
No, because the farmland in that part of the world is not overly valuable. It's not high value agricultural land, and so we will have to pay for it, and we're likely to pay a more fulsome price than a traditional farm buyer for that land.
Sure, it's not agricultural land anymore.
No.
Okay, COVID. Let's talk COVID-19. Global pandemic. It's put the global economy into reverse. To what extent has it affected you today? To what extent will it affect delivery of the feasibility study? To what extent does it put pressure on the project overall? Should we be worried, or are you sanguine and taking it in your stride?
I'm pretty relaxed for the short term. We're very fortunate that we don't have a huge amount of work going on site in terms of construction or drilling, or we don't have huge teams out on site that we have had to furlough. So we were very fortunate in terms of the timing of our development for this pandemic to have occurred. That has meant that there hasn't been any real disruption other than what I mentioned before to our day-to-day work, which is it's just more frustrating to work over Zoom calls and things like that. In the longer term, well, it depends on how long this plays out. There's obviously going to be a fairly significant impact on the global economy. Interestingly, however, I have been reading that the fertilizer portion of the commodity market has been by far the least impacted. I guess as a function of the fact that it doesn't matter what happens in global trade, global economy, people still need to eat, and therefore the fertilizer industry is absolutely paramount regardless of what happens to the global economy. So I saw some notes from the Canadian potash producers that the demand for certain fertilizer inputs, including phosphate and potash, had actually been growing steadily over this period. So from that perspective, it's pretty positive. In the longer term, I think we need to see how this plays out, but it's suffice to say we are still having conversations with various potential strategic partners at this stage. Maybe they think they can get a better deal. They're certainly still interested in the project, and we're going to continue having those discussions, knowing that because of our current cash position, we're not in a rush to do anything. We don't need to accelerate our development plans at this stage. We don't need to raise any more money, so we can really take our time and see how the world plays out.
Okay, hold that thought about strategic partnerships. Let me ask you instead about Morocco and the government. To what extent have they gone into lockdown? Are they having a good COVID-19? Are they having a good pandemic? Because to be perfectly frank, I think the UK is having at best a middling one, and maybe quite a bad one.
Well, I think the benefit that Morocco has is, there is a lot of power centered in around the King of Morocco, and he can make decisions very quickly. Not quite in the same vein as in China, but certainly the ability to lock down a country for its own good sooner rather than later has become apparent in Morocco. So they were very quick to react, and they instituted a fairly severe lockdown to limit travel between towns, close bars and restaurants. They did that quite early on. So they've been far less impacted than, say, the UK, France, Spain, Italy. And so we have a fairly positive view on how they've dealt with it and how it's playing out in Morocco. It still does mean that there's limited travel. There's no foreign travel allowed to come into Morocco. And so we can't go down to site. But as I said previously, we don't have anything going on site. So there's no real need for me to be down there at this point in time other than to go and see the minister. And what
about permitting? What about the government function? Has it all just locked down and stopped as well?
Well, they're certainly focused on other things, but we're in the process of renewing some permits right now. And actually, we've been speaking to the government through our Moroccan team, and the engagement is there. But I think there's got to be understanding both ways that they are dealing with probably much more important things than than the day-to-day bureaucracy for us. So there's a bit of leniency given it either way there. In terms of our permitting, the big permit discussion will occur at the end of this year. And that is really comes post us delivering an environmental social impact assessment. So the two items of work that I will continue to push forward, regardless of what happens with coronavirus, are finishing the feasibility study and then also delivering that environmental social impact assessment, which allows us to move to the mine permitting phase towards the end of this year or early next year.
But would it be realistic to actually alert investors to the fact that the timeline might be stretched a bit?
Well, at this stage, we don't know whether or not the timelines will be stretched. We're seeing some cautious reasons to be cautiously optimistic about the path that coronavirus has taken. So flattening curves in Europe, somewhat flattening curve in the US, although I think it's probably premature to be calling their curve, them having reached the peak. So I think we've got some reasons to be cautiously optimistic that the second half of the year will be back to business as usual. And hopefully, as a result of the damage that this has caused to the global economy, there'll be some real drive and impetus from the government to keep pushing things ahead.
Okay, strategic partnerships, back to strategic partnerships. You said briefly that they were looking for a better deal. Now that sounds like strategic partners to me. They're always looking for a better deal. To what extent can you tell me about the conversations you're having and who are you having them with, and how much can you tell us about that and what you're looking for, what and where?
Well, we can't say too much because a lot of the conversations are obviously confidential for a variety of reasons. But
give us a broad overview, though.
We're talking to anyone and everyone who would have an interest in potentially financing a potash mine in Morocco. So that ranges from strategic industry participants who need the potash, right through to financial investors who are looking at this from just purely an investment return metric and the strategic value of this asset, to things in between. There's a lot of ideas going around. The benefit we have is, as a result of hopefully the feasibility study will confirm this, but the result of being among the lowest capital cost potash projects in the world and very high margin, it is an extremely strategically valuable asset for a wide array of potential partners who have deep pockets. So we'll continue to talk to them. We don't need to do anything with any of them at this stage. We are engaging early. We're going through various Q&A sessions and just understanding where we come out, what the best option is for our current shareholders. So we're very much.
Does COVID appear to have changed anything? Are those industry players in a tighter place than they were? Are investors, do they have tighter pockets, or do they still have cash to spend? What's your sense of it?
But again, it depends on who and where the groups are that you're talking to. So, for instance, if we were talking to a US-based fertilizer company, it would probably have had a relatively large impact. They would be battening down the hatches. They're probably not interested in thinking about what they're doing in the next phase of capital development, whether this makes sense for them or not. If you go the other direction and you go to a Chinese group, China is now very much out of lockdown and the groups are all back at work. And so there is a strong movement of information and I guess a lot of outbound calls coming from Chinese groups for the variety of mining projects at this stage, potentially again because they see this as an opportunity for them to get out and invest in projects that they like. So it depends on where we're talking. Yes, it has changed the engagement in some areas, and it has sped up engagement in other areas.
Very interesting. You're not going to tell me which types of group you'd have a preference for, are you?
Well, I think from my perspective, in order to deliver the best value for our shareholders today, it would be a partner who would come with us on the ride to develop this project and hopefully build something that is eventually going to be part of a mid-tier multi-nutrient fertilizer company. So, it's really a much more strategic long-term view that I'm taking. That would be my preference.
Do you want to stick with this project all the way through, or would you be happy to develop it so far and take an exit?
I think in terms of the long-term strategy, I want to see this taken through to production. Whether or not I have the right skill set to be the CEO to take it into construction and production remains to be seen. We may need to find
you're one of the smartest CEOs I've come across, Hayden. Come on now.
we may need a specialist mine builder, an operator to come into that role as we get closer. But certainly from my perspective as an investor in this project, I think I'd like to see it go all the way through to production and become part of a bigger multi-nutrient fertilizer story.
Fantastic. Okay, final question. What's your timeline for the deliverables in 2020? What do you expect to happen over and beyond the feasibility study in 2020?
So we've got the ESIA underway. Some of that does require some site work, so it remains to be seen whether that'll impact the timelines on that, but notwithstanding
and that's a major environmental study, yeah?
Exactly. So the environmental social impact assessment for how this project will interact with its surroundings and what are the risks and how do we mitigate them. We think that'll be done towards the end of the second quarter, so the end of June, maybe early into the third quarter. That then allows us to go into the permitting phase, which we think will take about 6 months. But there'll be lots of updates in between that those points. So there's going to be a lot of talk about permitting over the rest of this year. And then we really get into the detailed design and engineering and the various financing discussions. So at this stage, I don't see that it's going to impact us too much, but it'll depend how long the tail is for coronavirus.
Okay, Hayden, thank you so much for joining us. You've been very open and straightforward, and I'm sure the investors greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much. If you'd like to see other interviews like this one, then do subscribe to the London South East YouTube channel. And my final thought, thank you for watching and do stay safe.